The one to the west, the Cordilleran, covered at its maximum nearly 2 million square miles of land, stretching from Alaska to Montana, and may have reached as far south as the northeast corner of Oregon. That ice is what put the finishing touches on the formation of the Great River. The gouging of glaciers moving south and west did a good bit of the work, but it was the melting of the ice that had the greater effect. Around 19,000 years ago, when the glaciers began to once again retreat, a gigantic frozen wall, an ice dam, embanked an enormous body of fresh water that geologists call Glacial Lake Missoula. The gargantuan pond was 2,000 feet deep then, and about the size of today's Lake Ontario. On at least 40 occasions between 19 and 13,000 years ago, the ice dam that held back Lake Missoula failed. The resulting floods were epic on a scale that defies human imagination. Each one unleashed more water than was in all of the Earth's rivers combined, scouring its way through mountain ranges to inundate an area of 16,000 square miles to a depth of up to several hundred feet. In the center of the flood path was what will become the bed of the Great River. When the waters receded, the ultimate course of that river and of its connection to a vast system of tributaries was left behind. Where the river began then was where it does now, spilling out of the remnants of a smaller glacial lake that had been swept up into the Lake Missoula floods. Situated today in southwestern Canada, the lake bears the name of the river it has spawned, Columbia. Given the underlying law of rivers, water runs downhill, it's surprising that the headwaters of the Columbia River are at a modest elevation of 2,690 feet. The Columbia's long descent to the ocean, though, is not only expanded, but also hastened by the rivers, creeks, and streams pouring down into it from the mountains on both sides. Curiously, one is tempted to say, perversely, a river that for most of its more than 1,200-mile length flows south and west, begins by heading north for 218 miles in a detour around the Selkirk Mountains, taking in, among other lesser tributaries, the icy Spill-A-Machine River that plunges down from the eastern edge of Glacier National Park, dropping nearly 6,000 feet in elevation in 50 miles before pouring out of the rocks like a long waterfall into the Columbia. Then, at what has become known as the Big Bend, just above the northern reach of the Selkirk Range, the river makes a dramatic reversal of course, turning sharply almost due south as it drops through Canyon Hot Springs. Soon after, 60 miles above what is now the United States border, and still headed south, the Columbia is joined by its first truly major tributary, the Kootenai River, 485 miles long and draining an area of more than 50,000 square miles, dropping 6,600 feet in elevation from its headwaters on the northeast side of the Beaverfoot Range before it merges with the greater river. Flowing through and alongside steep mountains, the Kootenai collects the water of its own sizable tributaries, including the 128-mile-long Duncan, before emptying them into the flow of the steadily swelling Columbia. 1,000 years ago, two large tribes lived in this area, on each side of what they called in different tongues, Big River. To the west were the Sinixt, the Lake people, inhabitants of the region for 10,000 years, whose dwellings during the winter months were half-buried houses. East of the Columbia, the Kootenai Nation used an isolate language, one that had no relation whatsoever to those spoken by neighboring tribes. Some scholars contend that their ancestors migrated from what is today the Michigan side of Lake Superior. The Kootenai traveled the rivers in canoes as original as their language, made of dug-out cedar logs with pine bark on the bottom and birch bark at the gunnels, remarkable mainly for the way both ends were bent sharply inward.